Steve Asmussen's never won the Derby, but can he win the Preakness with Clever again? Stick around and let's discuss. Hi everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets. Here with the preview of the Preakness Spotlight Series contender, Clever again, for trainer Steve Asmussen. But before we get to this very intriguing horse, make sure to press that like and subscribe button today to NYRA Bets YouTube. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel, whether those are race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, and so much more. We got you covered for the Triple Crown, Saratoga, the Breeders' Cup, all the good stuff. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about Clever again. An intriguing horse for trainer Steve Asmussen, who, as I mentioned, has never won the Kentucky Derby, but certainly has had success in other big races and is the winningest trainer in North America. Interesting horse and an interesting route this horse has gotten to get here. I think that's what's really going to be fascinating about him. But when you talk about Clever again, he is the other primary pace presence in the race. You obviously have Rodriguez for Bob Baffert, who is a need-to-lead horse, but Clever again is just as fast. And this is going to be the really big question, is where do they draw relative to each other and who leads them into the first turn, and do they duel up on the front end, or does one of them try to sit and rate? This is the defining question of the race, I think, in my opinion. Because if you think they duel each other, then it really sets up for a horse probably coming from off the pace. If you think one of them sits, then you probably want to determine which one's going to go to the lead and have it to themselves, because Pimlico can be a pretty speed-favoring track. And there's a good chance that one who's able to get to the lead is able to go gate to wire. So a lot of things to discuss with this horse, but let's dive in and talk a little bit more about the details of this Asmussen runner. We'll see who the jockey ends up being for this race. Could be Rafael Bejarano. It could be Joel Rosario. It could be, a couple of other potential candidates. But like I said, not determined yet who the jockey is going to be. But from a pedigree standpoint, fascinating pedigree, because when you look at it, you would actually think turf. Not only because of Galileo's influence underneath, but even American Pharaoh's influence up top. Pharaoh's become a much better, in my opinion, a much better turf sire in some ways than a dirt sire. I know we've seen two of his offspring run well and just recently run in the Kentucky Derby. They didn't run particularly well in the Kentucky Derby, but they ran in the Kentucky Derby in terms of Publisher and Luxor Cafe. But, he's become, I thought, a really good turf sire in terms of American Pharaoh, and flattering, again, by Galileo. You'd see tons of turf influence. Yet here we are, 3 races into his career. He's never tried the turf. He's only ever been on the dirt. Now, he debuted at Keeneland as a 2-year-old in the spring. So he was one of these precocious 2-year-olds and didn't go, to a second start for quite a while. Just recently came back to win the Hot Spring Stakes. That's his last start. And he's got an interesting profile because, again, on paper, yes, aside from the surface consideration, turf or dirt or synthetic, he should have no problem with distance. But this will be his first time really stretching out to he did a mile in the Hot Spring Stakes, but again, going a mile in 3/16. Now we're stepping up a furlong and a half, and we're stepping up in class quite significantly. So from a pedigree standpoint, though, he should appreciate that added distance. It shouldn't be a detriment to him in any way, shape, or form. So again, plenty of things to like about Clever again, and plenty of things to at least be intrigued by with this horse. So let's talk about this horse's career. He was a $500,000 purchase at the Keeneland September yearling sale. Windshell thoroughbred, of course, with Asmussen. The horse debuts in 2024 as a 2-year-old and runs at Keeneland and loses actually to a horse, Dream Away, who ended up being a really nice horse. And so lost in what ended up being a very productive baby race, as we like to call them, but going 4.5. Now, typically, here's the thing, and I'll kind of mention this for a moment. When we talk about these 2-year-old races at Keeneland in the spring that are going 4.5, rarely do these horses have staying power in terms of becoming really important horses on the Triple Crown trail or really important horses at the upper level of whatever division they end up in. They often are just the most precocious horses that are 2-year-olds. They're the most physically developed. And at some point, everybody else catches up to them and they become kind of average or ordinary, or they have sometimes short careers because, to be honest, they can also get cranked up a little too quickly, a little too early, and they might not respond to that particularly well in subsequent races. So I'm always skeptical of these horses that come out of spring races as 2-year-olds. Especially later on in the 2-year-old campaign and obviously into their 3-year-old campaign, because oftentimes they don't end up being horses of great consequence. All right. But it's so interesting. This horse clearly was precocious, ran a big race at Keeneland, then goes to the bench until February. So goes to the bench for 10 months, brings him back in a maiden special weight, obviously, goes 2 turns, goes a mile and a 16th at Oaklawn, goes gate to wire, and wins that race. And then immediately steps the horse up into the Hot Springs Stakes at Oaklawn, goes a mile, again, gate to wire, pulling away from the field, earns a 101 Beyer speed figure, and oh, by the way, beat Gaming by 4 lengths. Gaming was the second place horse. Gaming, of course, came back to run third in the Pat Day Mile. So it's not like he didn't beat anybody. He beat somebody in that race. Gaming was, of course, your runner-up in your Breeders' Cup Juvenile as well. So he beat a nice horse in that race. He's now third back in this form cycle from a significant layoff. He's got a pedigree that would suggest, American Pharaoh, Pioneer of the Nile, Galileo. It would suggest more distance is not a problem. He broke his maiden going a mile and a 16th, so he can do, and he did a mile, at Oaklawn. So those are both 2-turn races. So the 2 turns isn't an issue. It'll be interesting to see if Jose stays aboard, because Jose might have another mount in this race, so we'll see. But Jose could end up staying aboard. That would not be a bad thing. But the question is, can he get the lead? Is he fast enough to get the lead from Rodriguez? I think he is. I think he is fast enough. I think it just depends on where they draw. If he draws to the outside of Rodriguez, that's going to be a challenge, because I don't know if he's fast enough to clear Rodriguez. If he draws to the inside of Rodriguez, I think he's got a huge advantage, actually, because I don't think Rodriguez is fast enough to clear him necessarily. And what he can do is then get up to the lead and just kind of push Rodriguez out a little bit going into that first turn and keep Rodriguez on his flank. And Rodriguez does not run as well in that sort of a position. He really is a horse that does much better up front. Now, I know my friend Barry Spears thinks Rodriguez can pass horses, but until he does it, I kind of am not going to take a short price on him doing it if I don't think he can get there. But a lot of it's going to depend on how they go into the first turn. Is this a horse that just has yet to really reach its ceiling? I mean, that's kind of freaky to think about, but 101 Beyer speed figure in only his third start, second off the bench. Could he get better? All right. And what is that ceiling? There's a lot of unknown potential here. In my eyes, he's a much more interesting horse than a horse like Goal Oriented for Bob Baffert, who's making his third career start and has, won his first 2, breaking his maiden debut, and then beating that allowance optional claiming company on the Derby Day undercard. Clever Again comes in well rested, having not run since March 30th. So nice nice cycle in between races, and is going to be fresh and ready to go. And Asmussen is as good as there is at getting these horses ready for these types of races. And again, it just matters how fast is he? Can he get out there up front? Is he going to duel with Rodriguez? And if he duels with Rodriguez, does he have enough stamina to have the staying power to do that and to be able to stick around for the end? It's a track that tends to hold up speed, but this opinion of Clever Again really comes down, in my opinion, really comes down to the post position draw. If he draws well, and if he draws to the inside of Rodriguez, I like his chances. I know traditionally we think outside is better. That you want to be kind of the outside speed. And while that's probably true in a lot of sprints, and it can be true in routes too, obviously, it does put more pressure if you're a need the lead horse to clear everybody on your inside to get over. And if you have Clever Again to your inside, I just don't know if Rodriguez is fast enough to clear him. Now, again, a lot of it comes down to how do you break, kind of what's that first 100 yards look like, etc. But Clever Again breaks, and he's fast. And he's fast going short, too. Yeah, he can sprint and get to the lead. So he's got a lot of legitimate speed. And again, can Rodriguez compete with that depending on where he draws? And can Clever Again show a different dimension? Can Clever Again rate potentially off the pace? Has Asmussen been training him to sit a little bit? It'll be interesting to go back looking through XBTV, look at some of the training footage, if we can find it, of Clever Again, to see, does he rate off of, does he sit to the outside off of a work partner, get a little bit of comfort and familiarity with sitting off a horse. Now, mind you, that doesn't tell you everything, because a horse like East Avenue trains like that for Brendan Walsh, and East Avenue clearly needs the lead. So just because you train a certain way in the morning doesn't mean it translates into how you run in the afternoon. But Clever Again, the price on him is going to be interesting, because Journalism, Rodriguez are going to be your top two choices. And then now that Baffert has entered goal-oriented, that horse is going to take, I think, a little bit more money, probably too much money in my opinion. And then you look at a horse like River Thames, who's big connections in terms of Todd Pletcher, might take a little bit of money. Gosker, coming out of the Lexington, speed figures would need to get faster, but might take a little bit of money, especially if Irad stays aboard. And then you have Clever Again. I think Clever Again might come in as your co-third, fourth choice. And at that price, I think he's very interesting, because I think he can get the mile in 3/16. It's just a matter of the trip that you think he can get. But if he draws to the inside, I like his chances a lot in this race. I think he's a pretty dangerous horse if he gets the right draw. If he draws to the outside, not only will he have to deal with Rodriguez, he's going to have to deal with goal-oriented, who I think is going to run interference for Rodriguez. Could be wrong about that, but just my kind of take on it, that Baffert, I think, would ideally like to be running 1-2 going into that first turn. And if Clever Again tries to get up there, that he's floating out Clever Again into the 4-5 path. So that's just kind of my thoughts on it. But another intriguing runner, though, to this race. Listen, I know people are bummed about Sovereignty not running in the Preakness. Doesn't mean that the race doesn't have some intrigue and some really fascinating new shooters who you might not be as familiar with because they've not been on the Derby trail to this point. All right. Well, listen, I'm going to stop there, but I hope that everybody's enjoyed this clip. Make sure to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube today. My name is Matthew DeSantis. Wishing you a great and profitable day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.